Get ready to witness the lightning-fast victories of chess prodigy Magnus Carlsen. From strategically dominating the center to executing lethal attacks, Carlsen demonstrates his brilliance against opponents like Espen Agdestein and Sergey Karjakin. Even the world's wealthiest individual, Bill Gates, falls victim to Carlsen's unstoppable mastery. Magnus Carlsen versus Espen Agdestein. Magnus started the game by advancing his pawn to g3, prompting Agdestein to respond with d5, establishing the king's fianchetto opening. After both players develop their initial pieces, Magnus strategically moves his bishop to e4, asserting dominance in the center. Following further piece development, both players' castle and a pawn exchange occurs. Demonstrating aggression, Magnus plays c4, exerting pressure on his opponent to capture the pawn. Impatient with the situation, Agdestein taps the table with a piece, and Magnus introduces his knights into the game, positioning them menacingly towards Agdestein's king while preparing a potential deadly attack. Magnus proceeds by playing his pawn to h6 and then skillfully brings his queen into play. Seizing the opportunity, Agdestein makes a critical mistake by capturing Magnus's knight, enabling Magnus to introduce his rook into the game. Magnus positions his rook in alignment with Agdestein's king, exploring checkmating possibilities. In response, Agdestein relocates his king to h8, granting Magnus the chance to capture a free pawn before trading the knight and bishop, subsequently bringing his queen closer to Agdestein's king. With victory within reach, Magnus diligently searches for the decisive move, which he discovers by maneuvering his rook to g6. Agdestein ponders the situation before defending by shifting his knight to f6, accomplishing little. Magnus seizes the opportunity to capture Agdestein's pawn with his bishop, leading to a series of piece trades that culminate in Magnus delivering a forced checkmate. Astonishingly, Magnus Carlsen achieved this triumph in a mere 18 seconds, demolishing his chessmaster opponent. Magnus Carlsen versus Sergey Karjakin. Magnus swiftly initiated the game by advancing his pawn to e4. Sergey promptly responded with e5, and as the initial developing moves unfolded, the position rapidly transitioned into the Ruy Lopez opening, a familiar territory for Magnus. After exchanging the knight and bishop, Magnus promptly developed his knight, demonstrating a clear understanding of the subsequent moves. Sergey then castled, prompting Magnus to ponder his options momentarily before castling his own king. As the game progressed, Magnus initiated an attack on Sergey's knight, which Sergey retaliated against. Magnus subsequently retreated, causing Sergey to contemplate his next move for a significant duration before playing his bishop onto g5, a crucial mistake. Capitalizing on this, Magnus advanced his pawn to g4, targeting Sergey's bishop. Despite the optimal move for Sergey being to capture Magnus's bishop, he instead retreated, committing another error. This marked the commencement of Sergey's downfall. Magnus, after maneuvering his bishop back, initiated a powerful assault, progressively closing in on Sergey's vulnerable king. Sergey, realizing he was in trouble, expended ample time contemplating his moves. Following the exchange of two knights and bishops, the players made a few additional moves before Magnus traded rooks, introducing his queen into the game. Sergey then launched an attack, prompting Magnus to play queen g6, delivering a check and gaining a pawn. Subsequently, Magnus secured a rook exchange, further augmenting his advantage. After a few more maneuvers, Magnus executed the decisive blow by advancing his pawn to f6, posing a checkmate threat. Sergey's chances of defeating Magnus were utterly demolished as Magnus concluded the game with queen g7, leaving no room for recovery. Remarkably, even after the entire game, Magnus still possessed nearly 2 minutes on his clock, having spent merely around a minute to defeat the esteemed Super Grandmaster. Magnus Carlsen versus Bill Gates. In Magnus Carlsen's next game, he was on the verge of defeating Bill Gates, the world's wealthiest individual, with a mere 12 seconds remaining on the clock. With the white pieces, a confident Bill Gates initiated the game by playing e4. In response, Magnus swiftly moved his knight to c6, prompting Bill to maneuver his knight to f3. Magnus swiftly played d5, exerting immediate pressure on Gates, forcing him to decide between capturing her pawn or facing capture himself. However, Gates opted for a different approach, choosing to defend the pawn with his bishop. Undeterred, Magnus commenced with knight f6, intensifying the pressure on Gates's pawn. Eventually, the pawns reached a point where they were traded off, allowing Magnus to introduce his queen into the game. Magnus's pieces began to exhibit activity, while Gates's pieces appeared relatively passive. Subsequently, Gates launched an attack on Magnus's queen, prompting Magnus to swiftly reposition it, leaving Gates visibly perplexed, struggling to determine his next move. In this critical juncture, Bill Gates made the ill-advised decision to castle, a move that proved disastrous given Magnus's already strategically positioned pieces surrounding Gates's king. Seizing the opportunity, Magnus executed bishop g3, placing a double pin on Gates's queen while also posing a severe threat of impending attacks. Instantly, Magnus skillfully advanced his knight, anticipating Gates's predictable capture of his seemingly free bishop. As Gates took Magnus's knight, believing the position to be safe, he failed to realize that he had already fallen into an irreparable disadvantage. Like a novice player, Bill Gates found himself in a completely lost position, and with his capture of Magnus's knight, he unknowingly walked into the culmination of the game. Magnus Carlsen delivered the final blow, checkmate, with queen h2, sealing his victory in a brilliant display of skill.